The Galactic Academy of Interstellar Studies stood as a testament to the unified progress of the known universe. Its crystalline spires reached toward the triple moons of Nexus Prime, refracting the purple-tinted sunlight into patterns that danced across the Academy grounds. The most prestigious educational institution in the Orion Arm had maintained its reputation for over 3 centuries, fostering the brightest minds from across 2,000 worlds. Today, however, the Academy's carefully maintained decorum faced an unprecedented disruption. Its first human exchange student. "Did you hear?" Zixatal whispered, their bioluminescent tendrils pulsing with excitement as they addressed their friend Marine. "The new exchange student is from that newly discovered planet. What was it called?" "Earth," Marine replied, their compound eyes rapidly shifting through various wavelengths to better observe the gathering crowd in the grand atrium. "Supposedly they achieved faster than light travel just 50 cycles ago. Rather primitive, if you ask me." The assembled students, representing species from across the galaxy, maintained a respectful distance from the Academy's entrance. Some floated on anti-gravity platforms, others stood on multiple legs, and a few existed as pure energy contained within environmental suits, yet all of them shared the same anxious curiosity about their newest classmate. When the transport beam finally materialized, the collective gasp was audible. The human stood there, bizarrely bipedal, with exposed epidermis and what appeared to be processed fiber coverings. No protective environment suit, no auxiliary breathing apparatus, not even basic radiation shielding. "Interesting architectural choice," the human said, gazing up at the spires with an unsettling array of white calcium deposits visible in their mouth. "The quantum stabilization must be incredible to maintain those angles." Professor Xylith, the head of xenological studies, recovered first. Their crystalline form vibrated with the traditional frequency of welcome. "We are honored by your presence. Honored student from Earth, though we must insist you accept our standard environmental protection package." "Oh, no need," the human replied cheerfully, pulling out a small device. "My readings show the atmosphere here is perfectly breathable. Bit low on nitrogen compared to home, but nothing I can't handle. Mind if I grab something from my bag? The transport made me hungry." The gathered crowd watched in horror as the human casually breached their own containment unit, which they called a backpack, and extracted what appeared to be a wrapped nutrient cube. Without any sterilization procedures, they simply placed it directly into their oral cavity and began mechanical breakdown of the substance in full view of everyone. "This is highly irregular," Professor Xylith vibrated, their crystalline structure showing signs of stress fractures. "Perhaps we should discuss proper protocols." "Oh, right, sorry, The human quickly swallowed. Several students had to deactivate their optical sensors at this point. "Where are my manners? Would anyone like a granola bar?" The offer sent 3 crystalline students into emergency hibernation mode and caused a gaseous entity of Proxima to compress itself to half its normal size in shock. In the resulting chaos, only Zixatal noticed that their new human classmate was looking around with an expression that, had they been more familiar with human facial movements, they would have recognized as barely suppressed amusement. The academic year was certainly going to be interesting. Professor Xylith's classroom resembled an amphitheater, more than a traditional learning space, with curved tiers accommodating various species' unique physiological needs. Today's lecture on planetary classification and habitability had drawn a particularly large crowd, many students curious about their new human classmates' background. As we continue our examination of Class 4 habitable worlds, Professor Xylith's crystalline forms sparkled as they projected a holographic display of various planets. We must remember that life adapts to its environment through careful evolutionary processes. Each world presents unique challenges that shape its inhabitants. The humans sat in the middle tier, apparently comfortable in the standard seating, despite their rigid skeletal structure. They were taking notes with an archaic manual input device that actually required physical contact with a processed tree pulp surface, a sight that had several of their classmates quietly vibrating with distress. "Let us begin with examples from your own experiences," Professor Xylith continued. "Mex Zixatal, please share the characteristics of your homeworld." Zixatal's bioluminescent tendrils pulsed with pride. "Luminara Prime is a Class 2 habitable world, with an atmosphere composed primarily of noble gases. Our surface temperature averages 280 Kelvin, and our gravity is a comfortable 0.3 standard units. Our greatest challenge is the occasional aurora storm, which can disrupt our natural bioluminescence. Excellent, Professor Xylith chimed. Memex, Marine. Hiveworld Zeta 9 maintains a precise 0.8 gravity to protect our exoskeletons, Marine clicked. Our atmosphere is rich in methane and hydrogen, with surface temperatures never exceeding 290 Kelvin to prevent shell deterioration. Our biggest concern is managing the seasonal spore migrations. The professor's crystal structure vibrated with approval. And NX Voidwalker? The gaseous entity pulsed its containment suit. The gas giants of the Proxima cluster require no solid surface. We float eternally in the upper atmosphere, where pressure remains between 0.8 and 1.2 standard units. Temperature variations of more than 10 Kelvin would be instantly fatal. Several students nodded appreciatively at these sensible, properly regulated environments. The human, however, appeared to be suppressing some sort of facial spasm. Now then, Professor Xylith turned their attention to their newest student. Perhaps you could share the characteristics of your world. Earth, was it? The human straightened up, that disturbing calcium deposit array becoming visible again. Sure thing, Professor. Though I should mention that we generally classify Earth as a Class 5 world. Impossible, interrupted Marine, their compound eyes rapidly shifting colors. Class 5 worlds are theoretical death zones. No sophisticated life forms could possibly. Mex Marine, Professor Xylith vibrated sternly. Please allow our colleague to continue, though I must note that there seems to be some mistake. Our records indicate that Earth is Their crystalline structure briefly clouded with confusion as they consulted their data streams. Oh, it's no mistake, the human said cheerfully, leaning forward with an expression that made several nearby students instinctively activate their defense mechanisms. Would you like me to explain why? The room fell into an anticipatory silence, broken only by the soft humming of environmental suits and the occasional nervous clicking of exoskeletons. Professor Xylith's crystal structure vibrated at a frequency that suggested both academic curiosity and mild concern. Please, they chimed, proceed with your description. The human's face arranged itself into what would later be recognized as a grin, though at the time it was interpreted by most present as a threat display. Well, let's start with the basics. You know how everyone keeps their gravity nice and stable. Earth's is about 1.1 standard units, but that's just the average. You see, the human continued casually, pulling up their own holographic display with primitive but functional technology. Earth's gravity isn't consistent everywhere. We've got these things called tectonic plates, massive chunks of our planet's crust that float around on molten rock. The classroom erupted in confused murmuring. Professor Xylith's crystalline structure developed several stress patterns. Excuse me, but are you suggesting your planet's surface is unstable? Oh, totally, the human replied, displaying a diagram of Earth's layers. These plates bump into each other all the time. Sometimes they get stuck and then suddenly slip, causing earthquakes. Those can reshape entire landscapes, trigger tsunamis. Those are huge waves in our liquid water oceans, by the way, and occasionally make mountains spew molten rock into the air. Zixatal's bioluminescent tendrils had gone completely dark from shock. Your planet randomly ejects molten material from within itself. Yeah, we call those volcanoes. Pretty cool, right? Some of them are underwater too. Makes for interesting diving spots once they cool down. Diving spots? Marine's exoskeleton clicked rapidly in distress. You willingly submerge yourselves in these liquid water oceans, near underwater molten rock vents? The human nodded enthusiastically. Sure, though you have to be careful of the pressure changes. Every 10 meters down adds another atmosphere of pressure. Some spots in our oceans go down to about 11 kilometers. Professor Xylith's voice carried a distinct tremor. And your species ventures into these death zones? Well, not personally. We send machines down there because of the extreme conditions. Though we did once build a vessel that went all the way down. Found some pretty neat creatures living there too. Whole ecosystems that thrive on chemical synthesis rather than sunlight. A gaseous entity student had to increase their containment suit's stability field to prevent dissipation from pure shock. Life in such conditions? Oh yeah, life's pretty much everywhere on Earth, even in the super acidic hot springs in the middle of frozen deserts, and in clouds of toxic volcanic gases. Speaking of weather, the human pulled up another display showing Earth's atmospheric patterns. This is pretty interesting. See, because we've got liquid water everywhere and varying temperatures, we get these massive storm systems. Define massive, Professor Zelith managed to vibrate. Well, our hurricanes, those are rotating storm systems that form over warm oceans, can be bigger than some small planets. Wind speeds can get up to about 300 kilometers per hour. They pull up tons of water into the air, which eventually falls back down as rain. Sometimes that rain freezes into ice balls we call hail, can put dents in vehicles if they're big enough. The classroom had gone eerily quiet, except for the sound of several environmental suits running emergency diagnostic checks. But that's just normal weather, the human continued cheerfully. The really interesting stuff happens when we get temperature extremes. Some parts of Earth can go from 45 degrees Celsius in summer to -40 in winter. That's at the same location, by the way. The temperature swing can cause the ground to crack and reshape itself. Marine's compound eyes had locked into a fixed pattern of disbelief. Your planet's surface temperature varies by 85 degrees Celsius in the same location. Sure does, makes construction interesting. We have to build everything to withstand both expansion and contraction, though sometimes the ground just opens up anyway. We call those sinkholes. One moment you're walking along, next moment there's a giant hole where solid ground used to be. Professor Zelith had to pause to allow their crystal structure to stabilize. And your species survives these conditions. Oh, we do more than survive, the human grinned, pulling up yet another display. We've adapted to take advantage of them. See, humans have this really efficient cooling system called sweating. We secrete water through our skin to regulate our temperature. We can maintain homeostasis in temperatures from about -50 to +50 degrees Celsius with the right equipment. Some people even go camping in extreme conditions for fun. The word fun triggered a wave of nervous movements through the classroom. Several students began quietly edging toward the exits. But wait, Zixatal's voice wavered, their tendrils barely glowing. What about your atmosphere? Surely that at least must be stable. The human's expression brightened even further, causing nearby students to activate their defensive shields. That's actually one of the most interesting parts. Our atmosphere is incredibly dynamic. It's mostly nitrogen and oxygen, you know, that highly reactive gas that causes rapid oxidation in most materials. You breathe oxidizing agents? Professor Zelith's voice had risen several octaves. Technically, we require them to survive. Our cells use oxygen to break down glucose for energy. Really efficient system, actually. Though it does mean we've had to deal with a lot of fires throughout our history. That's when oxygen causes rapid oxidation of materials, releasing heat and light. Sometimes our forests burn for weeks. Creates great conditions for new growth, though. The classroom had begun to empty, with students making various excuses about urgent appointments and sudden medical conditions. Those who remained were too fascinated or horrified to move. But hey, the human added brightly, I haven't even gotten to the really dangerous stuff yet. Want to hear about our magnetic field and how it protects us from solar radiation? Professor Zelith's crystal structure had developed a distinct crack pattern resembling what humans would recognize as a nervous twitch. I believe we should take a brief recess to process this information. Sure thing, though I should mention that on Earth we typically only take breaks every few hours. Something about our endurance evolution. The sound of multiple environmental suits engaging emergency protocols drowned out the rest of the sentence. After the brief recess, during which several students had to be treated for shock-induced system failures, Professor Zelith's classroom had been reinforced with additional stabilization fields and emergency medical drones. The remaining students had clustered together in protective groups, their environmental suits humming at maximum power. The human, apparently oblivious to the tension, had used the break to pull up more holographic displays. Right, where were we? They asked brightly. Oh yes, everyday hazards. So you know how Mex Zixatal mentioned aurora storms being their biggest challenge? Well, on Earth we get these things called thunderstorms, where the atmospheric electrical discharge actually creates plasma channels between the clouds and ground. Plasma channels, Professor Zelith vibrated weakly. Lightning, the human exclaimed enthusiastically. Massive electrical discharges that can reach temperatures of about 28,000 degrees Celsius. That's hotter than the surface of your sun, right, ex-Marine? Marine's exoskeleton had locked into crisis mode. You're saying plasma hotter than stellar surfaces regularly strikes your planet? Oh yeah, about 100 times per second globally. They can start fires, explode trees, and even turn sand into glass. We've learned to protect our buildings with lightning rods, metal poles that deliberately attract these plasma strikes and channel them safely into the ground. A crystalline entity student spontaneously developed stress fractures. You attract the plasma? Sure, better than letting it hit randomly, though sometimes it does anyway. Did you know humans can actually survive direct lightning strikes? There's this guy who got struck 7 times and... 7 times? The collective shock nearly overloaded the classroom's dampening fields. Yeah, but that's pretty unusual, the human continued, seemingly pleased with their audience's engagement. Most people only have to worry about regular stuff, like UV radiation from our sun. That's why we developed melanin in our skin, natural radiation shielding, though it can still cause DNA damage if we're not careful. Professor Zilith's voice had taken on a distinct quaver. Your genetic material regularly sustains radiation damage? Well, yeah, that's why we evolved cellular repair mechanisms. Pretty efficient system, actually. Though speaking of DNA damage, let me tell you about our oxygen atmosphere again. See, free oxygen is highly mutagenic. Stop! Zixatal's tendrils were strobing in panic. Are you saying your very atmosphere causes genetic mutations? Only a little bit. Most of the mutations are fixed by our repair systems. The ones that aren't either kill the cells or sometimes lead to interesting adaptations. That's how we got all our biodiversity. Would you like to see some examples of rapid evolutionary adaptation in response to environmental pressures? The human began pulling up images of various Earth creatures, each more terrifying than the last. This is a tardigrade, tiny thing that can survive in space. And here's a pistol shrimp that creates underwater plasma bubbles to stun its prey. Oh, and this is a snake that can inject proteins that turn your blood into jelly. An ex-human, Professor Xylith interrupted, their crystal structure showing clear signs of stress-induced refraction. Perhaps we should discuss your planet's safer aspects. Oh, sure, let's talk about our oceans. Did you know they're so deep that the pressure can compress organic matter into a sort of protein sludge? We call it marine snow. It's basically a rain of death that falls continuously in the deep ocean, super important for the ecosystem. Several students had to be escorted out by medical drones. But that's nothing compared to our oxygen levels dropping over geological time, the human continued enthusiastically. Life had to get really creative with energy efficiency. That's why we developed things like endurance hunting, you know, where we just keep chasing prey until they collapse from exhaustion. Some humans can run for over 24 standard hours straight. The remaining gaseous entity student had compressed themselves to quantum scales in terror. Though personally, I find our extremophile bacteria more interesting. We've got organisms that eat metal, breathe sulfur, and thrive in nuclear reactors. Really makes you think about the adaptability of life, doesn't it? Professor Xylith's voice had become almost inaudible. Your planet harbors life forms that consume radiation. And rocks, don't forget the lithotrophs, they're fascinating. Oh, and speaking of rocks, let me tell you about our planetary defense system against asteroid impacts. See, Jupiter's gravity usually catches the big ones, but occasionally something slips through. Last big hit created our moon and briefly turned Earth's surface into literal magma. Class dismissed. Professor Xylith's crystal structure had developed a completely new stress pattern previously unknown to xenobiologists. Please, everyone, take the rest of the day to process this information and perhaps update your wills. As the remaining students fled the classroom, many already contacting their family units to express final farewells, the human began packing up their primitive note-taking materials. Shame, they muttered to themselves, looking at their unused holographic displays. I didn't even get to the fun stuff about our immune system's constant internal warfare, or how we deliberately eat molecules that trigger pain receptors for entertainment. Maybe next class. The sound of Professor Xylith's crystal structure finally succumbing to stress fractures echoed through the empty classroom. The next day's class was held in a reinforced chamber typically reserved for studying unstable quantum phenomena. Professor Xylith, their crystal structure now reinforced with support braces, had insisted on the venue change. The remaining students, less than half the original class, sat behind energy shields, their environmental suits upgraded with emergency teleporters. Today, Professor Xylith vibrated cautiously, our colleague will discuss Earth's ecosystem classification. The human beamed. Thanks, Professor. I thought we'd start with food chains, since everyone seemed so interested in our biological adaptations yesterday. On Earth, we classify organisms into different trophic levels based on their energy consumption patterns. Like civilized photosynthesizers, Marine clicked hopefully from behind their triple-layered shield. Oh, we have those too, but humans are what we call omnivorous persistence predators. We evolved from earlier primates who combined tool use with endurance hunting. See, most Earth predators are ambush hunters. They rely on bursts of speed, but humans, we just keep following our prey until they collapse from heat exhaustion, since we're better at thermoregulation than most mammals. Zixatal's tendrils had begun emitting distress bioluminescence. You chase your prey until their bodies fail? Exactly, it's super efficient. We can sweat to cool down while running, so we don't have to stop to prevent overheating like most animals. Plus, we can carry water and track prey over multiple days if needed. Our ancestors could literally run antelope to death. The classroom's emergency stabilization fields hummed as they absorbed the collective shockwaves. But that's just our hunting style, the human continued cheerfully. The really interesting part is our digestive system. We can extract energy from almost anything organic. And thanks to our ancestors figuring out cooking, deliberately causing controlled chemical reactions through applied heat, we can even pre-process food externally to make it more digestible. You deliberately expose your nutrients to plasma-generating temperatures? Professor Xylith's support braces creaked. Well, usually not that hot, though some Earth cultures do enjoy their food nearly carbonized. But the best part is how we develop resistance to various toxins through our diet. Some human populations can even digest milk into adulthood, that's baby growth fluid from other mammals, because of genetic mutations. Several students had to engage their suits' emergency sedation protocols, and our tool use really sets us apart as apex predators. Early humans figured out how to shape rocks into sharp edges, basically artificial claws. Then we put them on sticks for better reach. Really revolutionary stuff. These days we have more sophisticated tools, but the principles are the same, extending our natural predatory capabilities through technology. Natural predatory capabilities? Marine's exoskeleton had begun spontaneously molting from stress. Oh yeah, we've got stereoscopic vision for excellent depth perception, great for tracking prey. Our shoulders evolved for throwing things really accurately. We're the only species on Earth that can throw with deadly precision. And our hands? Perfect for making and using tools, especially weapons. We even developed specialized neurons just for tool use. The human pulled up more holographic displays, these showing human skeletal and muscular systems. See these leg muscles? Perfect for long-distance pursuit. And our cooling system lets us operate in temperatures that would cook most other Earth mammals. Some humans even hunt in the middle of the day in our equatorial regions, where surface temperatures can exceed 45 degrees Celsius. Professor Xylith's reinforcement braces had developed their own stress fractures. Please, no more about temperatures. Right, sorry, let's talk about our cognitive adaptations instead. Humans are persistence predators mentally as well as physically. We can literally think our prey to death through pattern recognition and predictive modeling. Our ancestors could track animals for days by interpreting subtle signs like disturbed vegetation or residual heat signatures. The remaining gaseous entity student had to rapidly vent excess anxiety molecules. But my favorite part, the human grinned, displaying that unnerving array of bone-white calcium deposits, is how we turned other predators into allies. We actually formed symbiotic relationships with wolves, pack hunters that could run down prey almost as well as we could, bred them into what we call dogs. Want to see some pictures of my pet wolfhound? The classroom's emergency evacuation system activated automatically in response to the collective panic surge. The Academy's High Council had been forced to convene an emergency session after the previous day's evacuation. Now, in a specially constructed containment auditorium, the remaining students huddled behind military-grade defense screens while security drones hovered nervously nearby. Professor Xylith, now encased in a full-support exoskeleton, trembled slightly at their podium. Before we continue, they chimed weakly, perhaps we should discuss less aggressive aspects of human biology? Oh, perfect! The human perked up, somehow looking even more enthusiastic. I was hoping to talk about our healing factor. See, humans have this amazing ability to repair almost any non-fatal damage. We can regrow entire layers of skin, heal broken bones to be stronger than before, and even regenerate some damaged organs. A security drone spontaneously deactivated from logical overload. The really cool part is our response to physical stress, the human continued, pulling up diagrams of human muscle tissue. When we damage our muscles through extreme use, they actually repair themselves to be stronger. We literally get stronger by having our tissue repeatedly damaged. This is deliberate? Zixatal's bioluminescence had shifted to previously undocumented wavelengths of distress. Absolutely, we call it exercise. Most humans regularly stress their bodies to maintain and improve their physical capabilities. Some even lift heavy weights until their muscles tear or run until their leg joints start to deteriorate. It's great for development. The High Council members exchanged looks of pure horror through their quantum-shielded observation ports. But that's nothing compared to our pain tolerance, the human added excitedly. Humans can continue functioning with multiple fractures, severe blood loss, and even missing limbs. There are documented cases of humans surviving impalement, explosive decompression, and even direct brain trauma. We just sort of walk it off. Professor Xylith's support exoskeleton began emitting warning beeps. And our immune system. Now that's a fascinating bit of evolution. We've basically got microscopic warriors constantly patrolling our bodies, seeking out and destroying any foreign organisms. Sometimes they get a bit too excited and start attacking our own tissues, but that's just the price of having an aggressive internal defense force. Multiple emergency containment fields activated automatically as the stress levels in the room reached critical thresholds. Speaking of defense, the human continued, apparently blind to the mounting panic. Want to hear about how we deal with toxic substances? Some humans regularly consume small amounts of poison to build up immunity. We even deliberately ingest psychoactive compounds that alter our brain chemistry for recreation. Enough, a council member's voice boomed through the quantum comm. This cannot be natural evolution. Surely your species was engineered as some sort of biological weapon. The human blinked in surprise. What? No, this is all natural adaptation. Though I haven't even gotten to the really interesting parts yet. Did you know we can digest substances that would kill most other Earth organisms? Like how we process theobromine, which is toxic to many Earth mammals. We even seek it out in concentrated form and call it chocolate. The security drones began implementing evacuation protocols as the room's panic levels exceeded measurable limits. Oh, and we're one of the few species that can safely metabolize ethanol. That's a neurotoxin we drink for fun. Sometimes we have competitions to see who can consume the most before losing consciousness, though personally I prefer the spicy foods that trigger pain receptors. The auditorium's master control AI, faced with unprecedented levels of collective terror, initiated a full quarantine lockdown. Wait, the human called out to the fleeing crowd. I haven't even explained how we use controlled doses of deadly bacteria to strengthen our immune systems, or how we occasionally remove our own organs if they malfunction, or our weird circadian rhythm that makes us need to temporarily die for 8 hours every day. As the evacuation sirens blared and emergency containment fields snapped into place, the human stood alone in the auditorium, surrounded by abandoned environmental suits and the faint echo of mass panic. They mused, checking their primitive chronometer. Still had 30 minutes of class left. Wonder if this means the quiz is cancelled? The following week, the Galactic Academy of Interstellar Studies implemented several unprecedented policy changes. The entire xenobiology curriculum was revised to include a new classification. Deathworld species, Earth was given its own separate category, labeled simply as Do Not Approach. The human student found their daily routine significantly altered. Their walking path to classes was now marked by yellow warning strobes, and other students maintained a minimum safe distance of 20 meters, officially for their protection, though no one specified from what. Really, this seems a bit excessive, they mentioned to Professor Xylith, who was now teaching from inside a quantum-stabilized panic room. I was just trying to share our cultural perspectives. The professor's crystal structure, still showing signs of stress fractures, vibrated anxiously. The Council has officially classified humans as an extreme hazard species. Your casual relationship with death, cellular damage, and toxic substances suggests a fundamental incompatibility with normal spacefaring civilizations. Normal is relative, the human shrugged, accidentally triggering 3 proximity alarms. Besides, I didn't even get to tell everyone about our most interesting survival traits, like how we can digest almost anything organic through our highly acidic stomach environment, or how we— Please, Professor Xylith interrupted, their support braces creaking. No more revelations. The Academy's new policies included emergency shelters every 50 meters, mandatory survival training for all staff and students, and a complete ban on human dining practices in public spaces. The humans' habit of casually consuming potentially lethal substances like coffee and hot sauce had sent several witness students into therapeutic stasis. Yet paradoxically, application rates to the Academy had skyrocketed. Species from across the galaxy suddenly wanted to study humanity from a safe distance behind multiple layers of shielding with emergency teleporters on standby. The human found this particularly amusing, especially when the Academy's xenopsychology department began publishing papers about humanity's collective death wish and evolutionary suicide pact with their planet. You know what's really funny? They mentioned to Zixatal, who had gradually worked up the courage to reduce their safety distance to 15 meters. Everything I told you about was just basic Earth stuff. I never even got to the really weird parts. Zixatal's tendrils flashed in alarm patterns. What could possibly be weirder than intentionally damaging your muscle tissue or drinking neurotoxins? Well, some humans climb frozen water formations for fun. Others jump out of perfectly functional atmospheric vehicles with nothing but fabric to slow their fall. And don't even get me started on our extreme sports. 3 passing students immediately engaged their emergency teleporters. The Academy's final policy change came after the human offhandedly mentioned that they were considered rather timid by Earth standards and that their sibling was an adrenaline junkie who enjoyed something called free solo climbing. The resulting panic caused the Academy to establish the Earth Quarantine Act, effectively classifying the entire Sol system as a restricted zone. Warning beacons were placed at strategic points, broadcasting a simple message in all known languages: danger, Deathworld, approach at own risk. On their last day, as the human prepared to return to Earth, they left a small package in Professor Xylith's office. The professor, after having it scanned by 3 different security systems, carefully opened it to find a data crystal and a note. Thought you might enjoy some light reading about human medical practices. Did you know we sometimes deliberately stop our hearts for surgery, or that we can survive having half our brain removed? There's also this fun thing called parkour. Professor Xylith's crystal structure developed 17 new types of stress fractures before they finished the first paragraph. The human, boarding their ship home, smiled as they checked their communication device. Their application to serve as Earth's permanent ambassador to the Galactic Council had just been approved, unanimously, in record time, with a note requesting they maintain a minimum safe distance of 50 meters from all Council members. Well, they mused, plotting a course through an ion storm because it would be faster than going around it. This should be fun. Somewhere in the distance, several thousand alien species simultaneously shuddered without knowing why.